So the space on my computer is somewhat limited. I'm going to try and make this as concise as possible. But I do think it's an important subject. I think it needs to be discussed. I'm going to read out the article so you know the full context. It's not too long. It's from Tom Embury Dennis at The Independent. Please bear with me. Like I say, the context here is important. 10 days from death. Male domestic abuse survivor describes horrific ordeal as former girlfriend is jailed. A male survivor of domestic violence said he was 10 days away from death after he was repeatedly physically and psychologically abused by his girlfriend. Alex Skeel was battered, stabbed, burned, denied food, forced to sleep on the floor, and kept away from his family by Jordan Worth before he was finally rescued by police last year. The 22-year-old is now urging other victims to speak out after Worth, also 22, was jailed for 7 years after pleading guilty to GBH with intent at Luton Crown Court. Worth of Stewartby, Bedfordshire, was given a further 6-month sentence for coercive and controlling behaviour. Police said it was the first such conviction in the UK where the offender was female. The couple had known each other since they were 16, but during the last 9 months of the relationship, Scale said Worth subjected him to a sustained and prolonged campaign of abuse. I thought my limbs might have been amputated, he told the Daily Mail. I had open burns. I'd lost 3 stones in weight. I went from 10 stones down to 7. It was awful. It was 3 years of mental abuse and then it turned physical. He added, I was infected from the burns pretty much all over my body. Luckily, they managed to treat it. Scale said he suffered 4 years of mental abuse and the physical violence happened for about 9 months. In a separate interview with the BBC, he said on one occasion she told him her mother had received a message saying his grandfather had died. After watching him break down and cry for 2 hours, he said she told him it was not to and berated him for caring about his family. I didn't even know all the details of this before. I haven't read this in full yet. On a separate occasion, he said he woke up after Worth had beaten him on the head with a beer bottle. Then he said she chased him and hit him on the hands and face with a hammer. Police were eventually alerted to a situation by a neighbour who heard shouts coming from the couple's home. Ambulance staff took Mr. Scale to hospital with injuries to his hand and burns on his arms and legs. The court heard Worth had thrown boiling water over him. Despite his injuries, Mr. Scale said he returned to the Stewartby home he shared with Worth. It was only after the intervention of a police officer who persuaded him to reveal what was really happening that he felt able to tell the truth. And credit to that police officer, I'll just say it in passing. I want to tell my story. I don't want one more person to suffer what I've been through, he said. The hospital told me I was 10 days away from death. I believe the reason I survived to tell my story is to help others going through a similar ordeal. I would urge anyone in the same situation to ask for help. Bedfordshire police were fantastic and I do believe they saved my life. Speaking after the conviction earlier this week, Detective Chief Inspector Jerry Waite said, We are thrilled with this conviction. The sentence handed down reflects the gravity of which these offences are viewed. Coercive control is subtle, it isn't always obvious what's happening, and may escalate over a period of time. The victim may not immediately recognise the behaviour as abuse. The desire to control often underpins abusive relationships and can lead to violence. Okay, this case has understandably garnered quite a lot of attention online. There's been hundreds of comments. One person pointed out that had a man actually went to the police in this situation, there's a strong chance that he would have been accused of domestic violence and arrested. I think very often in domestic violence cases, her word against his, and so often the law comes down on the side of women. The likes of the Women's Equality Party will never ever recognise something like this. They do not recognise, or they choose to ignore, the fact that in certain areas clearly there is a bias against men. I think it's very telling that this is the first such case in the UK where a violent woman has been prosecuted, and it's right that she has been. Um, I mean, looking at her, people can be so deceptive. She doesn't look like she's not well built. She doesn't look like a violent thug, but she's clearly a pretty despicable individual. I would go, I don't want to distract from the point of this video by saying what I think of her, but suffice to say, I have a very, very, very low opinion of people like this. I think men who do it are complete scum. And yeah, she's a scumbag. And I've no sympathy for that lengthy custodial sentence. It's right. It's justified. This was basically torture. Um, and I've no doubt he's going to suffer from PTSD and so on. There's a lot of dynamics to this. I think one problem is, well, let's look at this in different ways. Feminists obviously don't cause domestic violence against men, right? But it is irrefutable that feminists have, maybe not all feminists, but certain leading feminist MPs have downplayed domestic violence against men. And I think that's a big problem. When the issue is discussed, it's always whataboutery. Oh, well, he must have deserved it. And we have to look at attitudes in general. Say, for example, a woman cheats on her boyfriend and the boyfriend beats her up. Most people will condemn that. Now, let's say a man cheats on his girlfriend, and I'm not suggesting this was the case here, but I just want to provide an example. Let's say he cheats on his girlfriend and then she beats him up or responds like this. There's other examples of, like I say, I don't often commend the judicial system. I think on this case he got it right. But look at the case last year. Lavinia Woodward, that notorious case of the Oxford student who stabbed her boyfriend and basically got away with it because of her social class and because the deranged judge thought that she was a talented young woman. Um, the judge in this case clearly used common sense. Absolutely, it warranted a custodial sentence, and I hope it sends out a message to violent women that they're not going to get away with it because they're women. But that has to stand. It can't just be this one case. I hope this sets a precedent. To be clear here, as a man, I abhor violent men. I abhor men who abuse women. I think they're despicable. But we have to have consistency. We have to have a situation where all victims get help. And it shouldn't be a case that, I mean, credit to the neighbour and credit to that police officer. But I think this was more an exception than the rule. But this has to become the rule. There has to be consistency. It's simply unacceptable that there could be lots of men out there who are not seeking help because they'll be ridiculed. And the problem is, a man can't really win in this situation. If he seeks help, he's either not believed, it's assumed that the woman was responding to his violence, or that he's a pushover, a weakling. And if he does retaliate, well, then he's a man hitting a woman. There's nothing in this report at all that suggests this was two sided. It suggests all the abuse was at her hands. And like it said, very often it starts off psychologically. Now, people might say, why didn't they just leave the relationship? Well, put the same question to female victims. Why don't they leave abusive men? It's not that simple. There may be situations where the abuser is blackmailing them emotionally, where they are maybe controlling their finances. There's a lot of aspects and a lot of reasons why the person might not leave them. You know, to those of us who haven't been in the situation, it is hard to understand how you can still love someone who's treating you that way. But I don't think we've a right to judge. Whether they be women victims or male victims. I hope this case is a game changer, and it's sad that it's taken such an extreme case to raise awareness, but it's good that it has, insofar as it's generating debate and hopefully it's spreading awareness. And my message to feminists is if you truly believe in equality, then you will support this custodial sentence and you will recognize that such violent women shouldn't be given excuses. It shouldn't be, oh, well, he might have deserved it. You know, if violent men are rightfully jailed, and I believe they should be, for the record, then violent women should be as well. We have to have consistency in sentencing. And one of my main criticisms of the feminist movement is it will forever preach about the supposed lack of equality for women, but actively ignore issues that disproportionately, where there is not equality, for example, in sentencing. I don't believe there is. I believe this case is an exception more than the rule. But like I say, I hope it's a game changer. And credit to this young guy for speaking out. He's not a weak man at all. He's brave for speaking out, and I just hope he can rebuild his life. Um, I imagine it will have an effect on his future relationships in terms of psychology. So I really, really hope he can rebuild his life. I've zero sympathy for her because we're not talking about a little bit of shouting. We're talking about sustained, long term, controlling abuse, physical and psychological. I mean, she's clearly a sociopath or something. Um, Let me know your thoughts. Thanks for watching.